Baldur's Gate 3 is just around the corner. Let me tell you, this is not a very beginner-friendly game. As a matter of fact, it's everything but a beginner-friendly game because it has a whole lot of different rules that if you do not understand, it's going to be very difficult for you to actually know what's happening in this game and how to properly play this game. Right out of the bat, this game is based on the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons. So if you're aware, if you're familiar with the tabletop game, role-playing game, Dungeons & Dragons, then you're just in the right place. But then again, for PC players, this is very familiar to us because we've had a lot of CRPGs on PC for quite a long time. But in consoles, which this is the reason why this is going to be so popular, because this is going to be releasing in consoles, consoles haven't really been getting a lot of CRPGs. It was until the last generation of consoles with the relaunch of Neverwinter Nights and Icewind Dale and whatnot that we actually did get closer to these games, but this is going to be the boom, and I'm hoping that this game is going to bring CRPGs to the highest peak of gaming possible. That being said, I'm going to teach you every single little thing that you need to know to be able to understand what's happening in the game and for you to have a nice playthrough, and when you're watching guides for people for you to be able to know or be aware what are they speaking about. Before we continue, I highly advise for you to watch my dice rolls beginner guide because we're going to be speaking about a lot of dice rolls in this game. As a matter of fact, just to clarify before we continue with the video, every single little thing that you do in this game, it's going to be based off a dice roll. Every action, every attack, every breath that you take, it's always going to be based on a dice roll. That being said, let's begin with the very first one, which is going to be difficulty class. I'm going to be using the easier terms first, but also this video is going to be structured for you to be able to understand the terms that are going to be linking between each other. The difficulty class, the difficulty checks, the most important ones, because every single little action that you perform, that you do in this game, it's going to have a difficulty check. Depending on your proficiencies, and your abilities, your modifiers, you're going to be able to bypass a difficulty check. As you're seeing on the screen right now, you're always going to be rolling a dice of 20 for the difficulty checks. So as you can see on the screen right now, I have a difficulty check for me, which is, it has a certain specific fixed number, and that fixed number we're going to be able to bypass it depending on the next abilities or modifiers that we are going to have. We're going to be speaking briefly about them in a little while. But what you need to know about a difficulty check is that you have to throw a dice, you have to roll a dice, and depending on that number that you have in front of you, it's going to be either easier or more difficult for you to be able to bypass it. And also do have in mind that even if your difficulty check, it's not that difficult to bypass. So let's say for example that I have a difficulty check of 2. And my proficiencies already give me that 2, so I might think that I have that guaranteed, but no. When you roll this dice, you have 5% chance for this to actually be a fail, because if you roll the lowest number, that is going to be an automatic fail. It doesn't matter the proficiencies that you have prior to that, and we're going to be speaking about the proficiencies and the modifiers right now. So the very first thing to have in mind is going to be abilities. Abilities are going to add modifiers that are going to add a little bit more easiness to be able to bypass those difficulty checks that we have been speaking about. And the abilities should not be confused with actual skills. Abilities, for you to be able to understand it a little bit better, we're going to be referring them as stats. So we have strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. And they are basically going to add modifiers for you to be able to perform certain specific actions easier than if you wouldn't. So for example, you have the modifiers list right here, which is something that you can consult as well. The modifier is going to be added to your difficulty checks depending on the ability score or the stat score that you would have. So for example, if I were to have, right now I have a 17 strength, which means that I get a +3 modifier score. So if I want to bypass a difficulty class of 5, I just need to roll a 2 on my dice because I am already going to be getting a +3 from here, and the maximum at 30 strength I am going to be able to have a modifier of +10. But the ability scores are going to do a whole much more than that. So for example, dexterity is going to contribute to your armor class, to your initiative, and to your ability to actually be able to deal damage with range and certain specific melee weapons. Constitution is going to give you more hit points, but it's something that you should be using only on characters that you know that they are going to be receiving damage. Intelligence is good for spell casting for wizards. Wisdom is going to be required to cast spells for clerics, druids, and rangers. And then charisma is going to be used by bards, sorcerers, and warlocks. But also, it's not mentioned in here. Very, very weird. But it's also going to be used by paladins. And like I said, every time that you're performing an action, there's always going to be a dice rolling in the background. These modifiers are going to make it easier for you to be able to bypass that difficulty check that we have been speaking about. Let me give you an example. The most cliche thing ever in the entire world. Being able to use a character to pull out a sword out of a stone. For that, let's say that, for example, you need strength and you need a difficulty class of 20 because it's a very, very difficult feat to accomplish. You would be using, let's say, for example, that you manage to actually roll a 17, and that 17 is going to be affected by your +3 ability check on strength, which is going to be able to pull that sword out of that stone. And that is an action, a contextual action that is going to be happening all around in this game, because this game, it's a very narrative driven game. You're going to find all of this kind of stuff during conversations, during actions. There's just so much stuff that is going to be happening in here for you to be able to roll dices and for it to be easier for you to actually manage to perform those actions or continue those conversations. Now I want to speak about dexterity because dexterity affects a whole lot of different stuff that the rest of the stats do not that much. Yes, they do add a little bit of an extra something, like for example, strength is going to increase your ability to jump faster, to carry stuff, so that is something very important. But dexterity is going to affect your initiative. Your initiative is how fast can you perform a turn on the combat. It's very important because this game is very driven on CC, and if the enemy manages to CC you during the whole fight, it's just not going to be good, it's not going to be bueno. That is why you want to be the first to act in every single combat. It's also going to affect armor class, which is going to be the very next thing that we are going to be speaking about. As you can see, armor class or armor check, it's going to be the very same thing as a difficulty check, but this is going to affect when an enemy is going to hit you. This is the roll that the enemy has to roll. This is the dice that the enemy has to roll to be able to bypass that armor class. The armor class is not going to diminish the amount of damage that you are going to receive. The armor class, for example, for an armor character like my paladin right here, it's going to either make the attack bounce off the plate of the armor, or for example, dexterity, it's also going to affect the armor class of a rogue or a nimble character, because it's going to add a modifier from the dexterity, and it's going to be able to make the character dodge that specific something. So armor class, it's not going to give you native damage reduction, it's just going to make for the enemy harder to hit you. And yes, armor class of 19 sounds like a very high dice to roll if you have just a dice of 20, but that percentage is going to be altered by a whole lot of different stuff. Let's speak about now how do I bypass that armor class and how do I actually deal damage, because there's a huge difference between attack rolls and damage rolls. When you deal damage to someone, there's going to be two dices that are going to be thrown. The very first dice is going to be a dice of 20. That dice of 20, to be able to hit you or to hit the enemy, you have to bypass that armor class. And as you can see, it is very difficult to hit my paladin right here because it has armor class of 19. My shield is giving me armor class. My armor, which is heavy armor, is giving me armor class. So the enemy has to roll a dice of 19 or a dice of 20 to be able to bypass that armor class and actually deal damage to me. So it's more difficult for them. But every time that you see, as you can see during the whole combat of the gameplay right here, before you actually hit someone, you are going to have percentages of being able to hit an enemy. So This is not the only thing that is going to determine how likely are you to hit an enemy. You're going to see the percentage, the ability scores, your proficiency with weapons, your advantages. For example, if you're on high ground and you're trying to deal damage from high ground as a ranger, you get advantage. An advantage basically means that you get to roll 2 dice of 20, and the highest value that is going to be the one that is going to determine whether you're going to hit or not. Once you manage to bypass that actual attack roll, you're going to deal a damage roll. I forgot to mention that clerics can also bless you, which is going to give you a +4 to your attack rolls to bypass that armor class that the enemy has. So that is why clerics are very important to have them in the party, because they benefit you by using the attack rolls and the saving throws. We're going to be speaking about saving throws a little bit later, but as you can see right here, if I were to be blessed, I would be rolling I would be getting an extra dice of 4 faces, meaning that I could roll a 24 instead of 20 to be able to bypass the 19 armor class that the character has. Once you have managed to bypass the armor class, you're going to actually be dealing damage. The damage is going to be a little bit different. Every single weapon is going to have a different kind of dice, and that dice is going to determine the damage. So for example, for my sword, as you can see right here, I have a damage of 8 faces. My dice is going to be 8 faces. As for example, on this one, the spear has 6 faces, but it also has a modifier, and that modifier is going to determine how much damage am I going to deal. So for example, this is compared right now with my cleric. My cleric has a proficiency or a modifier of 1 to the actual damage that I have right here. So for example, if I were to roll a damage dice, and I would be rolling from 1 to 8 damage, +1, +1, 2, +1, 9. Whereas if I would instead be using my paladin would be rolling the very same dice, but with the difference that I have a strength modifier, and I have a whole bunch of different modifiers that is going to increase the potential damage that I am going to deal right here. So for example, if I roll a 1 +5, it's going to be a 6. If I roll an 8 +5, it's going to be a 13. That is a damage roll. But the damage roll can also come from different kind of sources. So for example, my spell, Divine Smite, as you can see right here, it has 1 dice of 8 for the basic damage, and then it has 2 dices of 8 radiant damage, meaning that I'm going to be throwing 3 dices for a total of a maximum 29 damage. But if I were to increase this spell a little bit more, for this one, for example, I would instead be rolling 4 dices opposite to the 1 for my basic damage, to a total maximum of a probably 9 to 37 damage. So that is how you're going to increase the damage. That is the difference between attack and damage roll. Before you actually deal a dice roll for damage, you have to bypass the armor class of the enemy, which is a difficulty check, by rolling an attack roll of 20. And then finally, saving throws. They are very important, and for me to simplify them for you to understand them a little bit better, a saving throw is your resistances to debuffs. There's a whole bunch of different debuffs that you have in this game. You have poison, you have electrify, you have knockdowns, you have bleeding, you have fire damage. So there's a whole bunch of different debuffs that an enemy can place upon you. When an enemy places a debuff upon you, they have to bypass a difficulty check. That difficulty check is going to be the dice that you're going to be rolling, which is going to be translated to that saving throw. You get it? For you to be saved, you have to throw a specific number on your dice, and that specific saving throw could be increased as well by the saving throw of the bless from the cleric. So let's say, for example, that someone is trying to poison you. They place the debuff upon you, and then you have to throw a saving for you to be saved. Let's say, for example, that you have to bypass the skill is just so high the enemy has so much proficiency on that specific attack, so it is very difficult for you to bypass it. You have a difficulty class of 15. You can increase that percentage of bypassing that difficulty class of 15 with a 1d4 for blessing, which is going to give you, instead of a dice of 20, basically a dice of 24, giving you more percentages to be able to bypass it. So what you want to have in mind to be able to bypass debuffs, which then again it could be charm person, it could be disarming you, it could be knocking you down, it could be dealing you poison damage over time. What you want to be focusing on is for your characters to always bypass the saving throw, and if you want to place debuffs upon the enemy, they have to fail the saving throw for you to be able to place a debuff upon them. That is basically the most important terms that you need to have in mind if you want to actually have a nice time on Baldur's Gate 3 now that it's coming out your way. Do please, if you're a veteran of the game, if I forget about a term that you think that it is important for new players to understand, then by all means, please in the comment section down below. But other than that, if no one told you today, you're a gorgeous and beautiful person, you are indeed a gorgeous and beautiful person. I will see you got them gorgeous and beautiful people in the next one. Have a beautiful day and goodbye.